Thank you, John Kirby, for joining VOA again. I want to start with the G20. We are hearing that President Xi Jinping may not be attending. President Biden said that he hopes that he will still attend. So is there a sense that the president's disappointed? Was there a Biden-Xi meeting that is now not going to happen?
Well, as far as I know, there hasn't been a formal decision made by the PRC about whether President Xi will go or not, so we'll certainly leave it to them to talk about his travel plans and his attendance plans. As the president said, we certainly hope that he would attend. I mean, this is an important forum. In fact, one of the exciting things about the G20 this year is a focus on the G20 itself and advancing the G20 as a forum for improved economic cooperation around the world. So clearly there would be a role for the PRC, and we would hope they would take advantage of that.
I'll speak some more on the G20 focus on economics in just a second, but I want to stay on China, particularly because they just released this map, this annual map that they publish. And this map seems to be more expansive. It's not just the 9-dash line, it's now the 10-dash line. How does the administration feel about this?
Well, look, we have been very, very consistent about pushing back on these false maritime claims of the PRC, and nothing's going to change about that. This map doesn't change that policy. This map doesn't change that view. But it's not just what lines they draw on the map. Don't get dissuaded by that or distracted by that. It's about their coercive behavior. It's about the way they intimidate neighbors and some of our allies and partners like the Philippines in the Indo-Pacific to try to advance these false maritime claims.
And so do we expect the Vice President to be that forward-leaning as just you have laid out when she visits the region? I mean, last year she went to Palawan Island. Can we expect something, that kind of a pushback this year?
The Vice President is very much looking forward to her participation at the ASEAN Summit. ASEAN has really formed itself into a very vibrant, very vital collection, multilateral collection here of Southeast Asian nations, and they have multiple concerns, not just in the security environment, but economic as well. And the Vice President is looking forward to having meaningful discussions with them. She will not shy away from talking about our responsibilities as a Pacific power, which we are, and that's not going to change. She will not shy away about talking about how seriously we take our security commitments to our allies and partners throughout the region. Now, ASEAN's not an alliance, of course, but we have treaty alliances. 5 of our 7 treaty alliances are in the Indo-Pacific region, and so the Vice President will certainly make it clear that the United States takes those responsibilities seriously.
We'll go back to the G20. I think one of the proposals that the President will bring to New Delhi is this push for the U.S. to reform and bolster the capacity of the IMF and the World Bank to provide lending for global development projects as an alternative to Chinese Belt and Road initiatives. So as I understand, John, there was already a Western push for this. It was called initially Build Back Better World, and then it's the PGII, and now this push to move together with the World Bank and the IMF. So is there a change of strategy or perhaps a scaling down of ambition here? Can you explain?
No, not at all. In fact, it's quite consistent with everything the President's been saying since he took office. I mean, he believes that, and the data shows, that his approach to economic prosperity here at home works. Building from the bottom up and the middle out. This Bidenomics, it works. It works here at home. We can see that in the numbers. And the President believes that that same approach can work globally, can work overseas. And one of the ways it can work best is through improving and revitalizing multilateral economic development and multilateral economic investment in that development. That's why he has asked Congress for another $25 billion to reshape the World Bank. That's why he's appointed a new head of the World Bank. And it's why the President, as you rightly said, also launched at the G20 a couple years ago, the Program for Global Investment and Infrastructure, which is already starting to pay dividends. Now, the PGI won't necessarily be on the agenda at the G20, but we're certainly hoping that we get a chance to talk about it.
So this is in addition, not in place of the PGII program, this push for the World Bank?
The PGII is something separate and distinct from what we're trying to do in terms of the World Bank, but it's not just the World Bank. It's trying to improve the vibrancy of other multilateral economic development programs. So there's a lot to go on here. And look, I think it's important to keep all this in context. the war in Ukraine, I'm not saying that's the only economic stressor in the world, but it has been a key economic stressor, with particularly what we call the so-called global south, developing countries who are looking for alternatives to investment and infrastructure improvement that are hard to get, and are particularly hard to get through the high interest loan programs that the PRC is putting out there. And when the bills come due, it's, well, okay, you can't pay your dues, so you're going to have to pay penalties for it. What the president and the G7, G20 leaders want to put in place are alternatives to that, so that developing countries who have been affected by the war in Ukraine, whether it's through economic insecurity, whether it's food insecurity, it's inflation, it's unemployment, can have an alternative to try to address those problems.
Still on the G20, is the president disappointed that, unlike in Bali, this time around, the G20 chair, India, is not inviting President Zelensky to speak?
That's really up to the G20 chair. President Biden has a very robust relationship with President Zelensky. President Zelensky had a chance to address NATO allies in Vilnius not too long ago. He certainly has had multiple opportunities to speak with foreign leaders on his own. We believe that it's important that people stay focused on supporting Ukraine to the degree they can. But as for his invitation, I'd refer you to the Indians on that.
Okay. And still on the G20, can we get some more clarity on a possible Biden MBS meeting? Would you think this would be a really good opportunity to forward the agenda of a Saudi-Israel normalization?
The president believes strongly that our strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia is important. That's why we continue to work on that partnership. You can see it starting to bear fruit in terms of the truce that's still going on in Yemen, and some of the other initiatives that we got going on in terms of trying to encourage progress towards normalization with Israel. There's been a lot of good work with Saudi Arabia. The president looks forward to any opportunity to try to advance that. I just don't have anything on the schedule.
Okay, so there has been an invitation to meet with the president.
I don't have anything on the schedule in terms of meetings to speak to.
Okay. On the president's trip to Hanoi after the G20, our diplomatic sources say that Vietnam is interested in upgrading ties to not just a strategic partnership, but to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which would be a really big deal. Can you confirm that?
I'm not in a position to confirm press reporting on that or speculation. What I can tell you is that we very much value the growing and improving partnership that we have with Vietnam. And increasingly, over recent years, some of our interests are merging in ways that, 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't even imagine, whether it's economic, whether it's on the security front. The Vietnamese are, of course, concerned about PRC activities in their part of the Indo-Pacific. So there's an awful lot of shared common interests here, and the president's looking forward to discussing how we can advance those interests, but I won't get ahead of specific discussions or announcements.
Okay. For my Indonesian colleagues, an op-ed at the Jakarta Post said that ASEAN matters little, if at all, enough for Biden to skip the annual gathering, even though he will be in the neighborhood around that time. Does ASEAN matter to the U.S. beyond officials such as yourself repeating statements of ASEAN centrality?
Of course it does. I mean, the president hosted a summit here in Washington, the first ever for ASEAN, and has engaged with ASEAN leaders on numerous occasions, in person and, of course, virtually, over the last 2.5 years. And the vice president also believes strongly in the vibrancy, as I said earlier, of ASEAN and in our Indo-Pacific relationships. I think it's important to take a couple of steps back here, too. It's certainly ASEAN, but it's more than even that. The first two foreign leaders that President Biden invited to the White House were from Japan and South Korea. The first trip that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State took together was to the Indo-Pacific region. The president revitalized the so-called Indo-Pacific Quad. The president was responsible for putting together the AUKUS arrangement, which will allow us, in concert with the United Kingdom, to help Australia build a nuclear-powered submarine capability. And yes, we are looking forward to participating in this ASEAN summit because ASEAN is an important forum for discussion and pursuit of these common interests and shared values, as well as addressing the challenges that those countries face. And the United States wants to be part of that discussion. We have been with ASEAN since the very beginning of this administration, and we will certainly going forward.
John Kirby, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you in New Delhi.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.